Good evening. I'm Paige Cottingham-Streeter, Executive Director of the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission. And it's my honor and pleasure to welcome you this evening to the first in what will be a series of webinars featuring our 2020 creative artists. The Creative Artists Fellowship is one of the Commission's longest programs. It's a signature program. We are a federal independent grant-making agency, and one of our commitments to the arts is to provide an opportunity for American artists to do a residency in Japan. This year is special because 2020 was intended to be the presentation and the celebration of the Olympic Games. We decided that it was a good idea to demonstrate US-Japan collaboration by inviting American artists to work with a Japanese colleague who would then, over the course of time, produce a collaborative work of art to be featured during the Olympic Games. The theme of the work can vary, and our artists from various genres have focused on different aspects of the Games, focusing on diversity, unity, resilience. And that latter resilience is certainly apropos as we find ourselves in this suspended time because of COVID-19. The Games were disrupted, our lives have been disrupted. The artists have not been able to travel to Japan as they had hoped, but nonetheless, they are continuing to collaborate with their Japanese creative partners and their American partners. We're also keeping everyone connected as we are tonight virtually. And so I want to first recognize and acknowledge the wonderful collaboration and support and flexibility of our artists. I want to also thank our institutional partners, the National Endowment for the Arts, and also the International House of Japan. And we also just have a wonderful community of people in the arts sphere who have been so supportive along the way. But this evening, you're going to have a wonderful panel discussion led by our moderator, Mijo Walsh. Miho is very familiar to many of you. She most recently was the executive director of the Asian Cultural Council, and she has 25 years and more of experience focusing on US-Japan cultural and educational exchange. I don't even remember when we first crossed paths, but I know that there are so many points of intersection between Miho's career and my own, and it's just lovely to have her as a friend and a professional colleague collaborating with us on this project. And before we begin, let me just simply say that this is meant to be a dialogue. While we are not able to see our audience's faces, we want to certainly feel your energy and know that you're out there. So please feel free to utilize the chat box. Respectful conversation is welcome. We also give you the opportunity to participate by asking questions, and you can use the Q&A section, which is at the bottom of your screen probably. At this point, we're probably all very familiar with the mechanics, but the Zoom platform may be unique or different to some of you. Your mics are not on and you are not on camera, but we want to know that you're out there. We want to feel your energy, and this is going to be a recorded session. So if you want more, you want an encore, you'll have an opportunity to join us later. Please also feel free to share it with friends and colleagues at the conclusion of the event. And I think at this point in time, I've covered everything that I need to, so I'm going to pass the mic over to my friend and colleague, Mijo Walsh. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, Paige. It is such a delight to be here. I can't thank you enough for the warm introduction. And truly, the honor is mine, the pleasure is mine. I've been a long admirer of the US-Japan Creative Artists Program. I think that this kind of a program in the world today is essential. And as you say, it really has done an extraordinary job of creating connection. And I think in these sort of times of COVID and many different social movements, thinking about where we are in the world and what kind of world we want to foster in the future, the Nichibei Creative Artists Program is key. It's a key player. I'm particularly excited about tonight because I think, just as you say, typically the program doesn't necessarily involve artists working together towards producing a work of art. And because of our sort of situation with COVID and the way we've had to work, we get to have almost extra time now that the Olympics have been postponed, and the artists get to have extra time. And we, as audience members or admirers of their work, get to really, through this panel tonight, I think, are going to get firsthand insight into this process. And you don't really, as a sort of appreciator of art, you don't really get a chance to be a part of this process where you truly get to hear from the artists in sort of situ and in development. So this is a very exciting evening tonight, I think. We have two goals for tonight, I believe, and one is to really showcase the sort of who, what, and why about this project. And the second is really to celebrate collaboration. It's really to have a fun discussion. And I encourage, along with Paige, as Paige mentioned, any questions that can come from the audience would be most welcome. And I'll try and weave that into the discussion. I want to introduce the panelists, but I will say I'm going to give a super short introduction, and all of their bios can be found on the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission's website. So that we can get to the more interesting part of the conversation, I'm just going to share on the panelists right now. We have Gene Coleman, composer, musician, and director based in Philadelphia. Akikazu Nakamura, composer, shakuhachi master based in Tokyo, Japan. And Sansuzu Tsuruzawa, who is a Gidai-yu shamisen master and vocalist, and Adam Vidiksis, who is a composer, conductor, percussionist, and technologist based in Philadelphia. And one of the striking things right off the bat for me was really that each artist here has more than one word to describe them. Essentially, one word can't describe each of you. And I think that speaks to sort of the multi-talented experience you have, the backgrounds you have, and really speaks to this project. I think at the core of this project is this sort of multimedia, multidisciplinary approach. And I'd just like to sort of ask Jean to maybe start us off by giving us a broad introduction to how this project began and why you chose these particular extraordinary artists to collaborate with.
Yeah, well, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Miho. I'll just say briefly, so this project really wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for the opportunity that the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission offered by making this special fellowship opportunity. You know, the idea that they were going to focus on a collaborative project centered around the values of the Olympics. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I first saw the proposal for this online, I thought, oh, that's interesting. But I really thought about the sport aspect of the Olympics and thought, I have no idea how I could relate to that because I'm not a big sports person, you know? So nothing really clicked. And then several months later, the deadline to apply was coming and I was starting to think about it again. And then somehow it just came into my mind to think about the martial arts and in particular karate. Mm. And this is part of my background, having studied this. And I thought, I wonder if I could do something with karate or martial arts and my music. And I have so many wonderful collaborators in Japan. So that was really, you know, I knew there were such great, interesting people that I could work with on that idea. So I made a little quick research and found out that the Summer Olympics for this year, or it'll be next year, this is the first time that karate is featured in the Olympics, in the whole history of the Olympics. And so I thought, wow, okay, so in Japan, this will be an important fact about the Olympics, that you have this special situation. And I thought, okay, maybe that really create some more energy around doing something with this idea. Mm. So then I spoke with Aki and just asking him, hey, did you ever do anything like this? Or, you know, are you interested in this kind of idea? And he immediately said, yes, that could be interesting. So it started there. And I'll just say briefly then, the other piece of it that really got me going about the idea was if we could do something also with technology in an important way with this project, because I had this image of seeing the karate being performed, and as the movements were happening, the movements could generate music or generate a soundscape. So then I turned to my friend and colleague, Adam Vidiksis, and started asking him questions about motion sensor technology. You know, how could we do this? Could we attach motion sensors to karate performers? You know, how could it work technically? This kind of thing. So this was the initial thing. I had to really have some idea about that before I made the proposal. And then, you know, the proposals came together in a way, and thankfully it was successful. So then we really, you know, had a chance to delve into this idea and start exploring all the different tangents of it. I think the other thing that's really emerged was we started with this idea of the motion sensor technology, but quickly added to that was the idea of also exploring the activity of the brain during the karate performance, but also the mind activity of the musicians. So tonight you will see some demonstration of some of this technology that we're working with, in particular with reading the mind and making this a part of the artistic experience of this work.
Incredible. It really, it's, you know, listening to it, it's hard to imagine sort of how so much can be incorporated into one project. And I really, it's so rich. And I love, we were having a conversation the other day, you and I, and we were talking about sort of incorporating all these elements. And one of the things that is so striking is here you have Nakamura sensei, Tsuruzawa sensei, these masters of traditional Japanese arts. And so you have this one very profound traditional experience. And yet this project also incorporates cutting edge technology. In my conversation with Adam a few days ago, learning about how technology and hardware can sort of read brain waves and then translate that into musical note, and just having where I think we sit on sort of the cutting edge of new technological development. And part of what seems so appropriate in this is this really is a collaboration between sort of Japan and the United States, and it's rooted in sort of the arts and Japan. And Japan to me is a country that has always been of these two very distinct extreme points, a country that has somehow has been able to uniquely embrace both the super traditional and then the cutting edge technology. And I wonder if I can ask you a little bit more about that and the excitement about that. And I'd love to hear also from Nakamura sensei and Tsuruzawa-san and Adam, really, in terms of really working with these new technologies and what that experience was.
Yeah. So I'll just say here that this is always one of the things, this old and new relationship. This is one of the things that always inspires me so much about visiting Japan. Every time I go, it's a new pleasure to kind of step into this world where you see just in everyday life, this kind of relationship. I think it's something really special about Japanese culture. So for me, for example, walking down the street in Tokyo, and there is a 50-story skyscraper, and then next to it could be a beautiful Shinto or Buddhist temple, very close together. And, you know, this is such an interesting kind of connection point that's created just in like these urban spaces. So there's just things like that. I mean, that's more like very modern architecture and very traditional architecture, but that's just one example of how you see this sort of thing happening in Japan. You know, it happens in many other ways, but I find that just so exciting. And it's something that always energizes me about the culture and the people and how, you know, they're able to do this. It's really something unique, I think.
Absolutely, that fluidity between those juxtapositions, it just is really phenomenal. Nakamura Sensei, can you speak to sort of being, now I know that you in your sort of career have had many cultural exchange experiences. In fact, you have been educated in the United States, and while you are a shakuhachi master, you've had many experiences incorporating sort of new adaptations for this shakuhachi instrument. But can you tell us from your perspective a little bit about this juxtaposition or contrast?
Yeah, actually, now Japan is everything is mixed very much. For example, our music from the 4th century or 3rd century, those kind of very old music is streaming into this modern era. And then also each classification of the music is divided a lot. So now in Japan, probably more than 200 kinds of music, actually traditional. But for example, my shakuhachi and then Ms. Tsuruzawa's gidayu never collaborate. Probably in the history, 2 or 3 times. So this
Really?
is a very historical because Japanese society was divided in many classifications, and then also each village was secluded in the mountain. So each genre didn't collaborate together so much. So my shakuhachi and then also gidayu grew up in the different genre. But for example, in Japanese music, there are so many music, but gidayu and biwa gaku, biwa is like a Japanese lute, and then also shakuhachi. These three kind of music are the most expressive. So it means those three kind of music using a lot of unordered overtone and ordered overtone a lot. So well, that kind of stuff. And then, but we didn't collaborate. So Takemitsu chose shakuhachi and biwa. But this time, shakuhachi and gidayu, that's also very interesting. I wanted to do that, but I couldn't make the chance yet.
Okay, wonderful.
And
That's great.
yeah, and then also karate and our traditional music doesn't collaborate at all. So this is the first time probably in the history, gidayu, karate, shakuhachi, this combination.
That is so phenomenal. It really is such a cause for celebration when we talk about collaboration, and to think that it would be in the space of international cultural exchange that actually enables a much more sort of localized Japanese exchange, if you will, because as you say, the traditional arts are very much steeped in these learning from a particular master in that particular school and passing that particular tradition very authentically from generation to generation. So it is most exciting to me to see sort of the definition of cultural exchange encompass actually cultural exchange happening within different traditional music schools in Japan. So thank you for that.
And then also, even in Japanese side, this project is very complex, but also with American musicians and American technology, and then also inner thoughts in the brain, and also karate's body motion. Everything is mixed in the history, and so
Wow.
this is a extremely great collaboration, I think.
So
Right.
wonderful. And I want to maybe showcase, or we have a few visual videos lined up, but before I jump to that, actually, let me just ask, Tsuruzawa Sensei, you are a master of Gidayu and this traditional shamisen. And amongst your fans and people who listen to your music, how do you think their response will be to this new collaboration where you're incorporating cutting edge technology?
日本語でちょっと喋ってもいいですか？
はい、どうぞ。はい。
中村先生がほとんど言ってくれちゃったのであれなんですけど、空手のストップ&ムーブの瞬間っていうのは義太夫にとてもよく似ていて、義太夫もふんって勢いがとっても大切なんですね。なのでその息遣いっていうんですけれども、尺八も共通しているなって今ちょっと思いました。で、特に尺八義太夫、息遣いの差が激しい芸能なので、とてもそれは空手の動きに似ているなって今思いました。
ありがとうございます。So it's so interesting that even with the shamisen, you have this collaboration, and it sort of is parallel to the experience of the shakuhachi or karate, as Tsuruzawa Sensei is saying, sort of the importance of the use of breath and sort of the timing and the force of that sort of breath and movement is very, very important. And so actually, I guess my question was sort of, do current audiences of today embrace this? But I guess they would embrace it because it actually is inherent in the shamisen tradition to use this kind of sort of breath, and it's very parallel and similar. So it's maybe not such a big jump for audience members. But Adam, may I turn to you? Sorry, Jean, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment quickly that this is such an interesting point about the kind of commonality of these different Japanese arts practices. So even though there's no history of shakuhachi with karate or shamisen with karate, I felt somehow this will work together very naturally. And it's so interesting to hear the comments from Sansuzu-san and Nakamura-san that they I think also could feel this idea intuitively that it would make sense to connect these things. There are just some fundamental ways in which these things make a connection. And then it's kind of amazing to think that it never really happened before, Right. Maybe for some reason, these things never got a chance to be together. So now we can try to do that.
Incredible, indeed, historic. Adam, can I turn to you and ask you maybe to talk a little bit about your involvement as the technologist and representative of the cutting edge part of this project, and how your experience has been?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's been fascinating to be a part of this project, and I've learned even so much more. I've worked alongside Jean in many projects involving Japanese instruments and Japanese music, and this one has delved so much deeper even than anything we've been able to do before. So that's really been a joy so far. And just with regard to these are wonderful comments from my collaborators here, and it just makes me think also about often the way in which we think of the technology as something in the future. We often predict things about the future and future technologies, and but of course it's really something in the present. And these other things that we consider in the past, these traditional practices, are of course brought to us in the present. So we think of them as a dichotomy, but also oftentimes they're actually the same. And the way in which we choose to use technology actually then supports traditional arts. For example, if we imagine even just simply recording technology, we have access to hear so many more traditional art forms from the past than we ever could have had, you know, because if without recording, of course, your option, you know, 150 years ago was to find a master and have them play, you know, and be able to hear them play. So now, you know, you can hear all of these traditional arts, and that technology is really supporting this to continue to grow and actually reach more ears. So it's interesting how even though we tend to think a little bit that they're separate things, they're really intertwined and supporting each other to grow into the future.
That's such a great point, and that's so important for us to acknowledge. I think I'll speak for myself, but as somebody who is not the most technically savvy person, I always think of, you know, music and sort of music that involves, or sound that involves new technologies as something really futuristic. But it is important to note it has such value in today's world and archivally to be able to really ensure that this is going to be available to generations in the future. And I think that that's so important, especially for performance art, because, you know, it's different from other art forms that can go into collections or can be appreciated in museums, or, you know, you can read about. In performance art, really, to have these kinds of recordings, these firsthand recordings, is so important, ever important in the future. Maybe with that, we can move to sort of talking about the technology. And I think we are all very, very curious to see how the technology actually kind of works. And so, Adam, if I can turn to you and once again, sort of lead us through this expertise. I think it's so fascinating.
Sure. So I have a short video that demonstrates some of the technology. Maybe that's a good place to start so that people sort of have an idea of some of that behind the scenes thing that's happening. I'll share that. Hey everyone, Adam Vidiksis here, and I'm going to go over some of the hardware and software that we're using for KATA. So first, this is our hardware, our sensor suite, which is a headband, an EEG headband developed by a company called Muse. And the performers will put this on in this way, and there are 5 sensors in the headband that are placed around the skull and able to collect the EEG data. So those performers, whether they're musicians or martial artists, would wear the headband in this way. And so we can, once it's on my head properly here, we can start to see the data coming in. So we have this visualization. So we're sending this wirelessly actually to an iPad, which is receiving it and acting as our wireless hub for receiving the data via Bluetooth. And then we're sending that wirelessly to a computer, which is collecting the data. So what we're seeing here is custom software that we have written specifically for the project in a programming environment called Max. So this is custom code that collects all of these things, and there's lots of interesting data that we see, like my current delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma waves. We can detect when I blink or when I clench my jaw. We can also see that coming in as well. We can also visualize the data in other interesting ways. Here's some raw data mappings, but for example, here we can see the motion and position of my head via an accelerometer. So if I move my head this way, we can see those data change, as well as via a gyroscope, which says its relative position in the world. So the audience won't ultimately be seeing any of this specifically in the final concert performance, but this is what's going on behind the scenes. This is all of the things that are happening in order to collect this data. So this will be mapped in all sorts of interesting ways to create music and visuals specific to the data that we collect from the various performers in the piece, both beforehand via a number of different tests as well as during the performance. So this is the behind the scenes stuff of the hardware and software for KATA.
Wow, that is really neat. So fantastic. So essentially, with the band that and the code and the program that you've developed, it's both, you're able to capture physical movement and sort of monitor these brain waves. And with the brain waves, is it sort of the brain activity that's getting recorded? So if we think of it being sort of creativity that's happening and sort of thoughts that are happening, and essentially are we able to really sort of translate that into creating a visual representation of that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of interesting general things that we can know from the EEG data about the mindset of the person. It's very generalized because we're kind of looking at very large clusters of hundreds of thousands or even millions of neurons, depending on where we are in the brain. And these are related based on their location as well as the frequency of the activity to certain processes, but although they're very general. So one example is beta waves and their relationship to memory recall. So if you're making a recollection, then that would show up, or things about actually you're visualizing with your eyes closed. So if you close your eyes, then we'd have alpha waves, for example, changing. So there are direct one-to-one relationships between some of these things. Of course, we can't get specific as to knowing like what memory is being recalled or even generally having any idea about that. So we're not sort of reading the mind in that sense. But the interesting thing is, in all of these practices, musical practices and martial arts and things like that, they're really connected in very interesting ways to this. So, a master of an instrument is constantly making recall to their training and then executing that. And it's interesting to see how that process iterates as someone is performing, right? So it's a really complex function of recall and then production. So it's been a really cool thing to see actually in the data that we've done so far.
Fascinating. And to both you and Jean and Akikazu-san, I think when you speak to composers using this methodology, some of it is sort of relinquishing the control, or I guess it's sort of, you have the participant with the headband and you also have movement. And as a composer, you sort of have to leave some of that to the actual person who's wearing this hardware, this headband, and you don't know their thoughts, and you don't know their sort of emotions, and you don't know what's going on in their mind. And Jean, can you talk a little bit more about that and how you, I guess, maybe have to trust that you end up composing or having the ability to compose with what is generated from this?
Yeah, well, there's so many layers to this, which as an artist is extremely exciting to think about how we can work with this, And one thing that I keep coming back to is that this is such a rich space we are working in that we can't possibly put all the possibilities into just one work. So we have to focus on certain things. And then also I imagine many more collaborations with my wonderful colleagues working in different ways with this kind of technology and these ideas. So for this work, and to answer your question, it's really we have to find this kind of balance between the overall structure of the composition, which I'm creating, and it's quite complex what's happening there. And then the space in which the performers have the freedom, in this case, not only musically to express themselves, but then also the activity of the brain makes another kind of expression. And we're still thinking about this. So for example, should the brain expression just be something visual? So you get this visual field expressed, and then the music is coming in a kind of counterpoint to that. If we add sound to the brain, then there's also a kind of competition going on between the musician playing and then some other sound. These are interesting creative questions. And of course, we have a challenge right now, because what Adam and I would love to do is to be in Japan right now. with Aki and Sansuzu and making experiments together with this kind of situation. So we're still waiting for our chance to do that. I hope this spring we can really be together. And so there's a kind of laboratory process, you know, that will go on to help understand. But in any event, it's a balance between the overall form of the composition and the different features that I wanted to have, and then how the performers will react inside, you know, these different situations that are created. And you know, it's very exciting to think about that.
Definitely, it is so exciting, and nothing replaces the sort of exchange, the person-to-person exchange that happens in the same room. I mean, we've all talked about how great it has been to connect virtually, and it has been to continue a process online and in the digital space, but I don't think, I think we all agree that it is simply not a replacement, or it doesn't do the same justice as being in the same room. But can you talk a little bit, maybe each of you, about sort of working these past several months online, and how you have been able to sort of mitigate not being in the same room? Has there been anything unexpected that you discovered in working in this way? Maybe Nakamura Sensei, I can start with you.
I think this project is very good for collaborating many people, but I think when I listened to Adam's explanation, I felt this project can pick up everybody's unconsciousness. And then by unconsciousness, we control all the field and the time. And then so in a former era, probably the most important things of the art is expressing our unconsciousness, or sometimes unconsciousness controlling the art and everything. So it's a kind of communication of unconsciousness. So I think this project emphasizes this kind of the phase of the art. So maybe next time this kind of style of art is getting a major field of the art.
なるほど. Yes. And Jean, it looked like you were going to say something.
Oh, I love Aki-san's comment about the unconscious, you know, and how an important an idea this is in the history of art, you know. And so here we have a chance to reveal this or explore this in some way that wasn't possible before because of what technology can do. I also wanted to say that, I mean, for me, because I've been making research on brain activity for a number of years now, and I have developed these models for composing using different aspects of brain function. So this is a kind of personal exploration, which I've turned into a kind of a personal language of expression, you know. So I'm not a scientist, but I'm taking directly from this scientific research to try to come to some position with this material that I can do something creative. And I really feel that the possibilities for artists to understand the activity of the brain is going to be such an amazing new space for so many people to walk into, because when you start to understand something about how we actually function, you know, when you hear sounds, what is going on exactly in the brain? How is it processing sound versus vision versus smell and taste and so forth? This is so amazing, and it can be so inspirational to just understand that, and then to develop your art in some way which reflects this knowledge. So the technology then is another way of opening that door up, you know, so that there's another way to use that as something expressive as an artist. So it's a super exciting moment, I think, for artists to have this chance to explore these things, and we can really do something that wasn't possible before.
It's so encouraging to see nowadays much more cross-field collaboration, and I think artists working in the space of sort of their artistic practice, but incorporating elements of science in this. And Adam, your practice is very much steeped in this. And you know, I'm sitting here in New York City, and recently, or over the past few years, Columbia University has been developing a new sort of campus, and they intentionally built a science center next to the arts center, because that kind of sort of science and arts collaboration is really, there is so much science in art, and yet there's also so much art in science. So it really is an interesting thing to explore. I want to think about this idea of sort of the mind and body connection, because I think that that's also relevant to the karate's kata, and sort of really kata meaning form, and sort of thinking about form and control and the mind processing different movement. And so can you share a little bit more about that sort of mind-body element in your practice, Gene?
Yeah, so this really goes back to what I was saying about having studied martial arts as a teenager. And this was a huge influence on me. And I grew up in a very isolated part of the United States, northern Wisconsin, not a lot of cultural experiences so much that you could have in terms of museums or things like this. But I was able to start studying martial arts, and through the martial arts, then I became more exposed to other aspects of Asian culture, particularly Japanese and Chinese culture. So from this experience, I learned about Zen Buddhism and different forms of music. And then in the visual arts, I was making copies of Chinese and Japanese paintings, also the woodblock prints of Hokusai. This was all part of what I was absorbing, you know, personally about this. So it built up a big fascination for me about Japanese culture. And I finally had the chance then in 2001 on the first fellowship I had from the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission to spend 9 months in Japan. And that was really the beginning of all my collaborations with these, you know, wonderful artists. So they say that, but going back to this question about the mind and body, this was really a critical point for me in terms of trying to understand how we can kind of make something out of this situation, because the mind-body connection is absolutely central to the study of martial arts. I mean, as a beginning student, this is what you learn about: the breathing and the idea of how the body and the mind must work together, and the mind can discipline the body, and many things become possible. And so in music, acoustic music for sure, but also electronic music, you also have very important mind-body activities going on. So I thought, okay, this is one way we can make a connection between the performance of music and the performance of, in this case, of kata, the choreographed routines that are used in karate, which you know, are the main way in which the student learns the style, the particular style of karate, which is being studied. And the kata, you know, is also musical in the sense that it's like a song. You have to learn it, and it has an exact order to it, you know? So it has this same kind of connection with memorizing something and then performing it back again. So these are just some other connection points that we are thinking about, you know, like how we can work with these ideas. But I come back always to this mind-body question, because it's the way in which I think a larger audience can understand something about what we're trying to explore, it's the action of the body, but it's also the action of the mind. And we have the chance to show something about that relationship again in a way that wasn't possible before. So that's extremely exciting.
Very much so. And maybe now might be a good time to sort of contextualize it in sort of the context of traditional Japanese art. And I know we have just a few clips of both Tsuruzawa sensei and Nakamura sensei, and then one of the sort of sound overlaid on the kata form. So would it be possible now to maybe let's share that with the audience?
Yeah, let me just quickly introduce. So
yes.
If you can the first video we're going to show, it's just under a minute, and it's called, for now, Racing Mind. And this features images and some sounds of Nakamura-san. So you will hear the shakuhachi. And then I mixed this with a short excerpt from my second string quartet. And then there are visuals that bring all these things together. And you will see there's a kind of acceleration of action, which is taking place over the course of the minute. It's getting faster and faster. And this is it's really like the idea that you begin in a very calm place with the sound of Nakamura-san, and then the energy is building and building. And I say it's kind of like one thought can lead to 1,000, you know, and this is this idea of the racing mind.
Wow. So fascinating. And you do feel, I mean, as I'm watching it, I'm appreciating and also feeling my mind race to a certain extent, you know, one idea leading to the next. That's fantastic.
I should mention there also that when the images are moving very fast, you're seeing some images which are from the Sendai Mediatek. It's a very important building in Sendai, Japan, designed by the architect Toyo Ito. So this is another thing for me, is kind of connecting the idea of the way the brain works with architecture. There's some similarities there, and we even in neuroscience they speak about, for example, auditory neural architecture. Architecture is also a metaphor in terms of the development of artificial intelligence, which, you know, Adam could comment on. So for me, this is a very interesting metaphor to explore the brain and architecture and how these things have similarities. So this is all kind of suggested in a very poetic way here, of course, but this is what artists do. Indeed.
And yeah,
shall we watch another one? Or
yes.
So the next one, I think the next one is Kaimatica Remota. And this is, again, a short video. This actually shows some kata being performed. And then you will see on the screen the Montreal choreographer and dancer, Sarah Bronsard. And so what I asked Sarah to do was to make a creative interpretation of kata. Because I thought, okay, in this work, we present the kata, but we also have to show some way in which it's being creatively interpreted in a new way. Because this is also what we are doing with the music. We have the traditional music, and then we find a new pathway with that into something contemporary. So I thought, okay, we have to also try to do this in a way with kata. So this short video gives a bit of kata, and then you see Sarah, and she makes this wonderful interpretation of the movements that you just saw. And all of this has over it the music I composed, which features Sansuzu-san with the shamisen. And so you'll hear the shamisen quite a lot in this clip.
Wonderful. That is fantastic.
Great.
That's amazing. I definitely want to spend time sort of diving into this a little bit more, but may I first ask Tsuruzawa sensei, Sansuzu-san, could you talk about your feelings in watching this video clip and hearing your music being adapted to this particular project? And I know with Gidayu, you sort of, you know, you have the narrative and the puppetry in mind, but seeing it used in this way, 感想としてちょっと教えていただけますか？
初めてこのビデオを見たんですけれども、楽しかったです。で、三味線、日本の、三味線音楽はとても種類がたくさんあるんですけれども、その中でも義太夫の三味線は非常にノイジーな騒音のような弾き方がたくさんあるんです。でもこの方のじいさんの、要求はとても難しかった。
なるほど。
どのようにして弾いたか説明してくださいよ。多分皆さんあんまり想像つかないと思うので。
どのように弾き方ですか？
そうですね。うん。How to produce that sound? I want her to explain.
義太夫のこれはバチなんですけれども、これをストリングスの上をこう滑らせるようにこうキーッとこう弾きます。普通はこう弾くときはこう弾くんですけれど、ぐーっとこう形をこう作ったり、スライドさせたり、スクエアとかトライアングルとかパフォーマンスしながらやりました。
So we understand that there's a lot of different sort of traditions within the shamisen music, and Gidayu is one which is quite complex and quite loud, and can produce sort of loud sounds. And as we were just seeing Tsuruzawa-san sensei holding up the plectrum, I guess, and to create this particular sound, sort of running the plectrum along these strings to create that almost, it almost sounds sort of like technological in my mind, or sort of, you know, manipulated through almost sort of computer and technology. So it just is so interesting that we have this very, very, you know, an instrument that's thousands of years old, creating the sounds that sounds kind of like something you could almost create on a computer, but fascinating. And it was your first time to see this. to see this video. So exciting collaborations to come. Again, we're not in that same room, so this is sort of how we do it.
So actually, what was funny too is Sansuzu-san got to meet Sarah because she had a fellowship to be in Japan earlier this year. And so back in February, when we were in Japan, we were all together and we had a nice afternoon together, also with Adam. So they had this chance to meet. So, you know, even then I was imagining the two of them together somehow. And well, it wasn't possible to put them together. This was a virtual meeting, you know, because I took recordings of Sansuzu and then I gave instructions to Sarah in Montreal to shoot the video. And then we mixed these things together.
Wonderful. And can we speak maybe a little bit about the really sort of the Japanese traditional components of this composition, sort of what it draws on in terms of these elements?
Well, I mean, again, there's a lot of different things in Japanese music that really interest me a lot. I think a lot of Western, quote unquote, Western composers get interested in Japanese music because it has such beautiful ways of using abstraction. You know, in the shakuhachi music, you have these air sounds which are mixing with the tone. And this is a very specific language that the shakuhachi player uses in the music. This is very special. Like in the Western music with the flute in the classical orchestra, you could never make an air noise like this when you play your sound. It's completely unacceptable. But this noise of the air is actually so expressive. And you hear this when Nakamura-san plays his music. So in this Japanese music, you have the idea that noise can be a very beautiful form of expression, not just perfect tones or perfectly clean tones, but this other kind of sound world can be part of what you're hearing. And this can have a very strong aesthetic quality to it, which is really something very powerful and unique. So I'm very drawn to those kinds of things. In the case of the shamisen, you also have, especially in the Gidayu music, this kind of really powerful sound and also the voice. And this also has very special kinds of sound color characteristics to it that I'm very excited about. So what I could say is, in a way, the raw material or the traditional music has so many immediate elements that I want to just to work with. So I don't have to, I just sort of think, okay, I take this and I move with it a little bit, I transform it a little bit, because already the beginning point is so interesting, you know? So that's a big excitement, just to think how easy it is to work with this sound world and get something exciting to happen.
Right, absolutely. And it's almost what is, as you say, sort of almost unpredictable in a way. And it sort of, to me, is very, I mean, that sort of seems in a way almost Japanese, sort of this idea of, and I don't know if this is accurate, but sort of this concept of creating art and this idea of sort of something that's like wabi-sabi, where it's, you know, you just sort of unexpected, or a mistake can even happen, and that becomes aesthetically so rich. And I just also want to draw the parallel between sort of it's so I think relevant that this project is in parallel and going to be showcased during the time of the Olympics, because we think about sports and we think about oftentimes in the Olympics how many sports that incorporate sort of artistic elements have an artistic score, and then there's a technical score. So, or sort of a measurement of how well it was done, both technically and then aesthetically. And it's sort of interesting to me that we sit here and we're talking about Japanese traditional music, and we're talking about sort of different elements of how to value something. And we have this technical, very technical importance, and then we also have the aesthetic.
Yeah. You know, actually, just on that point, I wanted to mention
Yeah.
something also. It's a more general thing, but I think very interesting, which is that now in many sports practices, there is a great interest in what's called mindfulness or meditation practices. This is coming directly from the Japanese Zen Buddhism for the most part. And so now you have very high level athletes who use meditation practices as a way of enhancing their physical performance capabilities. We even now have on the technology side apps and devices that these athletes are using so that they can further discipline their minds to then perform their athletic ability even on a higher level. And so this is an interesting connection point because the martial arts were the first kind of physical practice to really think about the mind and how the mind can cultivate the body. You know, if you are a football player or something, in normal training, you don't go to the Zen temple and make meditation. This is something I think that the martial arts is bringing as a tradition into the larger sports world. And that's also really creating a kind of revolution in how athletes train and how they think about their minds and how to use their minds, you know, as a dimension of their ability to perform in an athletic competition. So we're really interested too to say, hey, look, we are doing this and we are connecting the mind and the body and combining music and martial arts, but this could be done also with other kinds of sport, and it could be very interesting.
Very interesting and so important. This idea of creating that awareness, both of your physical sort of physicality and your mind. I'm curious with all of you, actually, you're in your own practices before you or as you sort of get ready to perform. Are there certain meditative practices or certain sort of things that you do before performing? Maybe I'll start with Tsuruzawa-san. Could you share? こう演奏する前に何かのこうなんでしょうプレパレーションというかこう準備的にこう準備をするときになんかこう座禅を組んだりこうそういうことはしますか？
これ人によって違うんですけど、私はあまり喋らないくなる。でも直前まで喋ってて日常なのにいきなり舞台に出たらガラリと瞬間的に変わる人もいます。これはいろいろな人によって違いますね。能の役者さんとかでも瞑想する人もいますし、ずっと喋ってて、じゃあ行ってきますって言って舞台になったら能の役にすぐ変われる、チェンジできる人もいますし、私個人的にはまあ30分ぐらいは気持ちは落ち着けますけど、でも座禅組んだりはしないです。
わかりました。So sort of 30 minutes before getting into a quiet, calm space, but not necessarily meditating, but sort of stopping to talk. Nakamura sensei, how do you prepare for your?
I'm kind of same as Tsuruzawa-san. Spiritually, I'm focusing and then sometimes meditate, but I don't make the strict form. So before the concert or some performance, I like to concentrate at least 5 minutes. But I don't make the form and not so strict. But gradually focusing and then going to another world.
I see. Okay. And then Adam, I'm going to ask you to chime in as well, and then we have a question that's very relevant from the audience, actually. So I will pose that after hearing from you, Adam.
Sure. So in preparing for performance, I will frequently do mental run-throughs, even when practicing a piece, which actually helps. And this is something that now, as Jean mentioned, athletes have often been asked to do in their training. So performing the thing physically again, sometimes is not as beneficial as actually running it through in your mind and imagining yourself going through the process and then returning to it physically. So that's something that I do in the practice sessions as I'm preparing to do something, whether that's as a percussionist or conductor or on electronics. But also right before a performance, I'll frequently do meditations on listening that help to prepare me and focus my mind on sound and being open to the possibilities of sound, because it's that's something that we often don't naturally attune ourselves to. Oftentimes people get, we're very visual. So shifting our awareness to the audio field. And this is something I try to sort of walk around and do regularly as a musician and keep myself in that state as much as possible. But certainly right before performance, taking the time to open the ear, so to speak, via these listening meditations is really important.
Fantastic. So we've talked a little bit about sort of the preparation that happens, but a question from the audience, and you all are composers as well. How do you combine these sort of disparate elements, the traditional and technological, the Japanese and Western, the intellectual and physical, into a coherent whole? And what is the process of synthesis like?
So I think this is for sure a very individual kind of question. When you're working in a new space like this, there's no school you go to where you learn to to combine these things. So we are in a frontier where these elements have no big history of being combined. Now, for me personally, that's where I like to be. I like to be in this space where really something new is happening. That's very exciting. But also then the connections, or making new connections between very contemporary and very traditional things. That's also something really exciting. Now, how is this done? Well, I mean, again, it's very individual because there's no school that you learn this from. So for me, it's taking all the experience that I have, all that I have absorbed, understanding different kinds of disciplines and practices, and finding some way to bring all those things together. For sure, then each person thinks about what's most important to them in communicating. And then you have different models or questions about that. So, you know, in art, we always have to have this kind of question, which is like, you know, does it make sense? What is it? And there will always be some people who think, oh, this is nonsense. I don't like this. I mean, we can think about so many major art movements that in the beginning, people said, this is terrible.
Right.
You know, the premiere of The Rite of Spring of Stravinsky in Paris, you know, there was a riot and people threw things and they got in fights and all this kind of thing. So art can really, in some cases, generate very strong feelings between people who get it and people who absolutely don't get it. And I think we have to accept this. It's like, you know, to be creative, you can't always bring everyone with you. I mean, unless you're doing maybe like pop music or something. But here, you know, we are in a new space where we're trying to work with these new things. So it will take time for some people to understand that. Yeah.
Right. And this, you know, I think for me is really such a sort of logical segue into talking about the cultural exchange aspect of this project. Because I think cultural exchange is a very, very personal experience. At the end of the day, you know, I think the impact of cultural exchange experience is so profound and sort of influences us throughout our lives. And as all of us have said, you know, we've learned from and been transformed by that kind of immersive experience. And it's not just about sort of learning about another culture when you get to experience a completely different culture outside of your own, but it's also the learning that happens and the self-awareness that you build about yourself when you leave your comfort zone or when you leave your own country, really. I know so many just fellows and participants and artists who have sort of left the United States and go to another country and then really realize so much more about their own worldview as an American or even their own identity. But perhaps this is where we might say artists are uniquely equipped to advance this kind of mutual understanding and respect that happens directly as an outcome of cultural exchange. And it's because of this deeply personal experience and this sort of person-to-person exchange. So in that, how have each of your experiences been? And I want to make sure I get each of your sort of answers to this. How has your cultural exchange experience been through this project? Let's start with maybe Adam.
Sure. Well, I think this is one of my favorite things about doing music. It's one of the things I think that led me to being a musician is this way of working with people that's really unique and fascinating. And so when you can do this with people all around the world, you learn about them in a way that is really special. So certainly we learn a lot from each other, you know, when we go to lunch or dinner and the sort of typical interactions that you might have outside of doing music. But you're just so vulnerable when you are together, especially when it's on stage, but even in rehearsal. And so you have to sort of look someone in the eye and then fall into their arms, so to speak. Like you have to trust that they're going to be there and make this together with you. And there's so much that you learn about people and the cultural practices that come from in that moment. It's just a really special, it's hard to find outside of music. And that's my favorite part. So, you know, in this, you know, kind of speaks to our experience throughout this. You know, I've been able to be together, all of us together in Japan just the one time so far because of the pandemic. So, you know, there's also been some exchange, obviously remotely, but, you know, I really do look forward to that time when we can be together and make music. And again, like sort of look into each other's eyes and have that special moment. That's really my favorite part.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Nakamura sensei, how do you feel?
When we collaborate with other cultures, I can study and I can feel many things, but not only the surface, but also in the profound part of the people or humankind. I can feel. So I know Jean's profound part. And then after that, we can collaborate good mixing part by unconsciousness.
Very much so. So well said. Okay, Tsuruzawa sensei, for you, you know, how do you feel about this cultural exchange experience? And I want to say that I'm specifically asking about the word sort of how do you feel, because I recently learned that sort of the motto of the Olympics in Tokyo next year is Kando de watashi tachi wa hitotsu ni naru. And I think that's what they're sort of saying in Japan, sort of through, and kando is one of these words, again, that just does not translate. I think we use the word emotion or being impressed, but there's this concept or idea out there of sort of being impressed and being emotional, sort of having an emotion, and then we become one. So, and this does happen, I think, through cultural exchange. So, Tsuruzawa sensei, can you, コメントしていただけますか？
日本人もあまり 型について知らない人がたくさんいると思うんです。なので、私もそうだったんですけど、ジーンから空手のことを教わって、そして空手のことを一生懸命ちょっと勉強したっていうことがあるので、なんかそういう意味で日本人とかそうじゃないとかっていうことは関係なく、グローバルな視点で、日本空手を通じていろいろな文化に興味を持つきっかけになってるんですね、実際私にとっても。だからみんなにとってもそうじゃないかなと思います。で、それを私は楽器で表現するっていうのが私の仕事なんだなって思いました。
Wow, I don't know if I can do justice in translating this very deep, sort of wonderful thought, but the idea of just sort of not necessarily being defined by whether it's Japanese culture or American culture, but the opportunity to have worked with this group so far, and Jean, through you learning about karate and kata, and sort of something that Tsuruzawa Sensei didn't really necessarily know about, has enhanced her appreciation for learning about different things, learning about different forms, learning about different fields and aspects of different of things that you're not familiar with. So I think that there's that sense of discovery, really, of sort of being immersed in what you don't know, and then actually developing an appreciation for really sort of having more experiences like that, where you can learn about what you don't know or different, really.
Yeah, I think it's all something that can help cultivate empathy. I mean, if you move outside of your normal place where you live and the people you go somewhere else and you're a bit of a stranger. And that changes your perspective, of course. You see people differently. You see their culture in a way they don't see it. And then if you can express this to them, it can be somehow interesting for them. Like, he's looking at this in some way that I don't think about. And the same way with Aki and his, it was so interesting when he explained about the influence of Jimi Hendrix on his music very early on. And then when he said that, I thought, yeah, of course, he has the Jimi Hendrix sound in his shakuhachi, This is so it's just this kind of switching positions on something where then you realize something new about something that you thought you knew.
Right.
But you never know everything about something. And so another person can show you something about yourself that you didn't know. And I think this can create this idea of empathy, that we understand something about other people and something about not just ourselves, it's not just about me and what I think, it's really important what these other people think. And then we come together in some kind of way, which is really constructive.
So well said. And I really think that sort of experience and the art of listening and really putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, I mean, that is what cultural exchange is all about. It's not, the word exchange is such an imperfect world when we as practitioners of cultural exchange sort of think about it, because it sounds so transactional, but really it's so much more than that. It's so much bigger than that and more profound. And it's really sort of the ability to really step into somebody's shoes and see things from their world perspective, or their worldview, which is so important. And I loved the story that came up in one of our conversations, Jean, where you and Nakamura Sensei were collaborating, and then when the audiences heard, would you share that sort of short piece? It's so great.
Well, this is actually from 10 years ago. Nakamura-san and I collaborated on the score for a Japanese silent movie from 1926 called A Page of Madness. And we had the premiere of this music at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 2010, so 10 years ago. And as it worked out, basically, I composed most of the music in the first half of the movie, and Aki-san composed most of the music in the second half. And it worked very well somehow, even though there was a big stylistic change in the music. But I spoke to some people from the audience, and they all were quite sure that I composed the second half of the score, and Aki composed the first half. So they had it completely opposite. The impression of the audience was completely opposite of, you know, how it really was made. And I thought this was so interesting that we're in that point now where things are mixing in such a way that, you know, people can make some assumption about something, and just because they think, oh, it's a, you know, this kind of person from this background, so it must be this, you know. And then in this case, it was something completely different. So this was really an enjoyable surprise, you know, to hear people and their impressions on something like this. So, yeah.
I love that. And it is really that element of surprise, or that element of discovery, right? I think, you know, we are talking so much now about diversity. You know, it's a very important, I think, sort of discussion to continue to have and continue to promote and advance. And yet there's something about it where I think people still are talking about sort of overcoming or tolerating or enduring or sort of bringing diverse groups together. And it stops sort of there, you know. And what I love about cultural exchange and the organizations and individuals that sort of support cultural exchange is this idea that it doesn't have to stop there. Let's get to the place where we're really celebrating diversity, you know, and I think some of the celebration happens in that discovery, in that surprise, in that really sort of experiencing how wonderful different voices and completely different experiences can be. And connecting that and sort of going back and forth. And so in that sort of a follow-up question, I'm just gonna look at the question, another question that's come in, and we touched upon this, but just to make sure we did answer this question, the idea of distance and virtual collaboration required by COVID, how has this changed and evolved this project? So again, I think it's sort of along the lines of asking about the difference of cultural exchange, sort of person to person, and then what has had to happen in a virtual space.
So I'm just going to jump in here. So, because I think the most consistent thread that we've had has actually been the work that Adam and I have been doing, because we have this student team from Temple University in Philadelphia, which is made up of students from Adam's this amazing music and technology program that Adam developed and is the head of. And so we have a team of students who we've been regularly meeting with over this whole year, all of it remotely, you know, because it wasn't possible to do any of this in person. And that's been really interesting in terms of like just as a working process. And then on top of that, Adam and I have been meeting every week just to, you know, check in. And I mean, as it turns out, at least part of our conversation has tended to be about politics because that's a lot of what's been happening this year. But, you know, it's given us this chance because we can't meet in person to keep connecting and keep talking about the important elements that we're trying to develop. A lot of that has been to do with the technology things. But of course, other questions about, you know, how this thing is going to work artistically and when can we go to Japan? And, you know, we have all these things we want to do in Japan, in addition to directly rehearsing with our colleagues. So, you know, it takes discipline, I think, to stay focused and to say, okay, we have to go forward. We have to find a way to be creative and positive. But there's that frustration too about not being able to, you know, be there in the room with Sansuzu-san and Aki-san and, you know, and have that musical connection with them, you know, but it's coming, you know, we know that we will manage to do this, and we have to just stay disciplined and we will have our chance.
Excellent. That sounds wonderful. Well, we're coming towards the end of our program, but I was thinking we might end on the one video that we haven't shown, which was the video of Nakamura sensei actually performing that we saw. It's a very short clip, but I always like to end on sort of beautiful artistic expressions. And I think that this might be a nice way to sort of wrap us up in a musical moment. Would that be possible?
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm sorry, is it the transient geometry, Gene?
No, I think Miho's referring to the Aki playing solo on the nose stage.
Yes. That would be wonderful.
Here it comes.
And oh, here it comes. Yep. So it just transports us to a just wonderful place. I really, there's something about music that moves us. And I remember at one point the visual artist, Anne Hamilton, once told me, sound is the way we connect over a distance. And I think that is so true. And that is how many of us, I think, have the pleasure and privilege of experiencing music and sound. But as we wrap up, maybe we have just 2 more minutes before I turn it over to Paige to just have each of you just make a final comment on this project, which I hope we will get to discuss again, because it is sort of in development and it just is so interesting. And I think there are so many questions about it, and we could continue talking as the day is long about it. And I'm sure it will take different turns. But if we just take the last sort of 2 minutes while we're in this group before we turn over to Paige to just make some final comments about anything really, that would be wonderful, I think. So Nakamura sensei, can I start with you?
I think this project has a lot of things. For example, Japanese history and Japanese culture, and then also European history and European culture streaming into the American culture and American history. And also those are combining together and then touching to the many kind of music, many kind of aspects of the music and the performance and brain and the body, and then consciousness and unconsciousness, and those are streaming into this project, I feel.
So full and rich. It's so true. 鶴澤さん、鶴澤先生、なんか最後にコメントをお願いします。
私もストラビンスキーが大好きなので義太夫の三味線でこうちょっとこうボディラングイッジといいますかね、そういうパフォーマンスを頑張りたいと思います。ごめんなさい。
Wonderful. ありがとうございます。Yes. All right, Adam.
Well, one of the things that I find most fascinating, and as everyone has mentioned, is how rich and how many facets of this there are. But one of the ones that I find so interesting is how we can use things like data not only as an inspiration, as often artists have done for probably all of human history, to take something, but also then use it, the material of it as itself as generative in the piece. Is really fascinating. So it's another element of cultural exchange. Japanese forms and data structures, and then incorporate them into the piece and have them inform sort of every element of the fundamental building blocks of the music is really fascinating. So that's been an incredibly fun part of this, and so enlightening. And it's really a credit to Gene, I have to say, that you know, as it's a bit mysterious sometimes, people, about how the technology happens, but it, you know, it's very much like any other instrumental practice, that you get instructions, you know, from a score, essentially from the composer, and then it's up to the performer or the technologist to produce this. And it's really such a credit to Gene that he's able to take all of these threads and give instructions that to all of these other folks that are going to create something that's so powerful and weaves these together in this way. So I think that's really just been one point that I think is so important.
Well said. And Gene.
Well, actually, in reference to that, it's like we ran out of time to show our third video, which was the one that combines what Adam's doing and Sansuzu and Aki. But we will have these videos available on the KATA website. And so there'll be a chance for people to come to that website and see some of the things you saw tonight, and also this other video called Transient Geometry. And we will have more material like this we'll be sharing. Also, there's an Instagram account for KATA Project, and people can look there also. And our plan now is to update all of these things on a very regular basis. So there'll be new information, hopefully every week, for people who are interested.
Fantastic. And before I turn it over to Paige, we're 1 minute over. Apologies for that, and apologies for not being able to show the culminating sort of video, but maybe that can be sort of a hook line for the next conversation.
Yes.
But I wanted to thank each of the panelists. It's been such an incredible experience to learn about your project, and I'm so excited to continue to learn more. And you're truly representative of just extraordinary individuals who are advancing the U.S.-Japan relationship through artistic exchange and through the beautiful friendships that you've created. And that really came through to me moderating this panel, just the warmth and the sort of friendships that have been built over this project. So with that, I pass it back to you, Paige. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Miho. You did a fantastic job. And I think, frankly, our audience has been mesmerized and could probably listen and watch even more. But that we have to at least whet people's appetite and give them something to look forward to. But in my closing comments, I want to not only thank again our creative artists for the patience and the perseverance that they've exhibited. They're talented individuals that have been faced with extraordinary circumstances and are certainly doing their best to fulfill the project. But just to really underscore that it is a community that we're all a part of. And each of you in this presentation have demonstrated that each part is valuable and precious and has something to offer, but together it's something really unique and beautiful and stronger. We're all stronger for it. So I want to say to the National Endowment for the Arts, to the International House of Japan, thank you so much. You bring so much to this initiative. I also want to remember that it was, gosh, back in February when we were all together in Tokyo in the ambassador's residence. And thank you so much to our partners at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo and the Public Affairs Office. They were so hospitable and really helped us to kick off this initiative. That's the last time we were all together. And I look forward to the day when we can be together again. But until then, let's continue to enjoy the process. And it is the process that is critical, even as much as the final product itself. The friendships that have been developed, the collaboration that's happening, the cultural exchange that's apparent, the warmth and the friendship and the generosity between our two countries. I just can't communicate enough how much I'm just awed by the work that each of you are doing. And Miho, you did a fantastic job as moderator. Thank you so much. Dean, congratulations. Nakamura sensei, Tsuruzawa sensei, and Adam sensei, thank you all for your commitment to this project. And with that, I'll say good night.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paige.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.